On today's episode of Digging for Truth, I'll be speaking with the Reverend Gary Byers and with my co-host Henry Smith. We're going to be talking today about the wonderful land of Jordan, looking at the biblical accounts and looking also at the archaeological work being done there. We're so glad that you joined us today. Well, today we're going to talk about Jordan. And Jordan is an important country in Israel. Sometimes it's just forgotten when people think of archaeology. Some people don't think of Jordan. They think of Israel, and they think of
the Jordan
trips.
River.
Yeah, well, they could think of that as well. Yeah. They think of the Jordan River. They think about Egypt. Anyway, they think of these really super high-profile sites. But Jordan is high-profile. And we want to talk about that. Now, Gary, you dug at Jordan. You've dug at Shiloh, too. But you dug in Jordan for 13 seasons. Yeah. And so you have a lot of experience there. And I'm hoping today that our viewers will get a real great sense of how important this nation is and how important archaeology is in the land of Jordan.
Well, I dug in Israel for years in 4 different sites. And it hit me one day as I'm digging in Jordan every year as well, and I'm realizing, boy, a lot of Bible stuff happened in Jordan. Yeah. And then I get to thinking about it, and the Holy Land extends east of the Jordan River. Yeah. Always think of it stopping there, but it goes east. And if you remember the famous Madaba Map, the east side is very much a part of the Holy Land as the Madaba Map was displaying. In the city of Madaba, Jordan is where the map's located. So Jordan is really very much part of the Holy Land, Old Testament and New Testament. Even through the life of Jesus, it's pretty an amazing place. The people of Jordan are many of the traditional Jordan people consider themselves descendants of the Bedouins, and they really have a good bit of that old Bedouin Middle Eastern hospitality style, and they're very gracious people. Islam is the predominant religion overwhelmingly, right. But there are Christian people there, and there are Christian churches there, and I've been to Christian churches in Jordan, and it's a wonderful place to visit and to dig there, and I'm very privileged to get to dig there year after year.
All right. Now, Gary, in terms of the tribes of Israel, like who would have been living in the land of the modern day Jordan?
So our understanding, as we read in the Bible, the Israelites crossed the sea, went to Mount Sinai, spent 12 months there, then moved north to Kadesh Barnea, messed up there, and for the next 38 years wandered around in the desert, winding up on the Jordanian side, east of the Dead Sea, and even up just north of the Dead Sea at Abel Shittim is the name of the place, and that's where they camped out last before they crossed over. And just up in the mountain, just to the east of Abel Shittim, is where Mount Nebo is, where Moses died. And so the Israelites came wandering through that area, and when it was time to cross over, 2.5 of the tribes said, "We're good right here." Now just think about this. Yeah. God has this promised land that He has been preparing us for all this time, and we say, I'm just good where I am. Thank you very much. I think we'll just stay here. And I think it was a real bad move on their part. Now Joshua said, okay, you can stay, but your armies, the men, have to go and fight, and then you can come back. Ladies, women, children can stay, and stay where you've been, but the armies are going to go over and fight. So the 2 tribes of Reuben and Gad, and 1/2 of the tribe of Manasseh stayed on that side. And I guess it's no surprise that when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came down there and destroyed everything, he started on the east side of the Jordan River first, and they were the first ones to go. And so it's unfortunate. Yeah. They settled in my mind, for second best. And people of God don't need to settle for second best, and in some cases we need to stop settling for second best.
That's interesting. You know, I was thinking about the theological tension there, the mystery of God's promise, and then sometimes God allows us to do what we want, okay, when it's not his best for us, you know, but he still works in that and still cares for and loves people when they decide to do their own thing. But in the end, it didn't work out so well for them. Yeah. So, you know, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it quite the way that you expressed. I thought it was very good.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures for students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Welcome back to Digging for Truth, as I'm joined by my co-host Henry Smith and by archaeologist Gary Byers, and we're continuing our conversation about the land of Jordan, looking at the biblical accounts and also looking at the archaeology there. We're so glad you joined us today.
So Gary, in this period, so this side of the Jordan, the east side, we had a conquest that took place actually before Moses dies, right? Yeah. And is buried on Mount Nebo. It took out some kings over there. The king of Og, the one with the giant bed, right? We read that. Yeah. That's an interesting narrative. But also there were some other people groups over there that are mentioned in the Bible repeatedly. Maybe you could talk about them a little bit.
Yeah. So when they were coming around from the south side of the Dead Sea and moving up north, first there were the Edomites, and they were relatives of the Israelites through Esau, the Edomites. Mm-hmm. And then they went and the Edomites wouldn't play nice in the sandbox with them and said, you can't come through our area on the King's Highway. You've heard of the King's Highway. That's on the highlands of Jordan. So they said, you can't do that. You have to go around. So then the next one after Edom was Moab, and Moab was related to the Israelites because the Moab was the son of Lot and one of his daughters, and Lot was Abraham's nephew. So they were relatives. And then they got up north, and the Moabites wouldn't let them come through, so they had to go around them. And then they got to where the Ammonites were, and that was Moab's brother. So they were all related family, and of course, typical, couldn't get along, couldn't cooperate.
Even centuries later, they couldn't get along.
Still, centuries later they couldn't. So they were all those nations were there, and the Israelites had to work around them. And then Amorites were there, and the Og was of one of the Amorites, and then Bashan up north, and they actually defeated those nations on the east side, not Edom, Moab, or Ammon. God wouldn't allow them to mess with them because they were family.
Because they were related, yeah.
So, but the others they defeated. So that at Jericho, when the Israelites crossed over, they said, we heard what you did to the kings on the other side, and we're scared to death around here of what you guys could do here.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting. So there's a rich history already you've laid out, just in a couple of minutes here. Sometimes we forget. We have an article on our website, Dr. Wood wrote a few years ago, The Forgotten Conquest. Yes. And because it's kind of, we always talk about entering into the land, Jericho, and so on. But here we have these very significant events during the life of Moses, in fact.
Yes.
So it's very good stuff.
All right. Well, Gary, are there some other significant events, Old Testament-wise, that connect with Jordan? What are some things? We're talking about the tribes. We're talking about Israel's migration. Other things connected with Jordan.
Well, of course, the story of the cities of the plain, Sodom, Gomorrah, and the cities of the plain, most every scholar believes that's in Jordan. On the east side of the Jordan River and or the Dead Sea, somewhere down in that area is where they were located. So way back from the very beginning, Jordan was in the picture of the major events in the Bible.
And according to our reckoning, we're talking like 2000 BC here.
Yeah.
The cities of the plain,
Yeah.
according to the
Yeah.
biblical chronology. So yeah, I mean, we're talking
Way back in the
way
beginning.
back,
Yep.
Genesis 18 and 19.
Yep.
Yeah.
And of course, so Abel Shittim is just north of the Dead Sea, where the Israelites camped, and then Moses went up to Mount Nebo and died. Then they left from there, and they crossed the Jordan right there, just north of the Dead Sea, right across from Jericho. So that whole thing starts in Jordan, and then goes east. Elijah and Elisha went from Jericho. We just made the trip backwards. Went from Jericho to the Jordan River. Elijah made the waters part, and they crossed over. And then it was time for Elijah to go, and God took him out in a whirlwind with a chariot of fire. And Elisha took Elijah's mantle back and went back to the Jordan River and crossed back over and got it done. So Jordan was part of that deal. When King David's son Absalom fostered a rebellion against him, David, when David had to leave, left Jerusalem, he went across the Jordan to stay over there on the Jordanian side. So it's the Old Testament. There's a lot of Jordan, especially the east side of the Jordan River Valley in there. There's a lot of Jordan in the Old Testament story.
You reminded me of something we've talked about before, but I thought this is very pertinent. The Moabites and the Moabite Stone.
Yes.
And how much is mentioned there about Israel. Maybe you
Yes.
could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Even though we've talked about it before, it's such an important discovery. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
The Moabite Stone was this monument. The ancient kings would make great big stones, carve them down, and then have inscribed on them their messages. And of course, this was a permanent message. And King Mesha of Moab, he had this monument, and he was writing about himself and his God and how he always was victorious and always won and who he was beaten. And he talks about the Israelites, the tribes, even mentions the God of Israel. And he's living at the time of David, a little after, and he even seems to make a reference. There's a textual reference to David, Israelite cities. It's amazing. The interaction was the Bible talks about the interaction. The Moabite Stone talks about that same interaction. It's amazing confirmation what the Bible talks about. The ancient King Mesha talked about it too.
Yeah, and that's just one instance. That's one inscription found with this enemy of Israel at this time. I mean, the Moabites are the enemies of Israel. It's interesting. God, it just occurred to me. So, right before the entrance into the land, God doesn't allow them to fight against them because they're family. But later they become antagonists and are threatened by the Israelites. So it's kind of an interesting historical development.
Yes, you're right.
That is happening there. God is merciful to them, their ancestors, but then later on that falls apart.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, God recognizes those familial ties, but then there are other lines crossed later on, and then it's curtains for people.
Yeah.
Curtains.
Yes.
As they say.
Bible in Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible in Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Welcome back to Digging for Truth. We're having a fascinating discussion today with archaeologist Gary Byers and with my co-host Henry Smith, and we're talking about the important biblical land of Jordan. We're so glad you joined us today. You know, we want everyone viewing today to understand that we're talking about the land of Jordan, and we're tracing out this history, but we're saying, you know, when we think of the Promised Land, we have to expand our minds beyond the current borders of Israel today. And we have to really keep that in mind. The Promised Land was a pretty extensive tract of land. And so, anyway, there's archaeological work being done in Jordan. Are there a couple highlights of archaeological work being there, Gary, that you want to mention?
The city of Petra, down south, Petra, Greek word for stone, rock, and maybe actually mentioned in the Old Testament a couple places. The rose red city of Petra was made most famous to the world with Indiana Jones' The Last Crusade, and actually Petra was voted in as one of the new 7 wonders of the ancient world in 2007. So everybody knows about Petra these days, and you can't go there without seeing Indiana Jones stuff everywhere. Well, that ancient city, which was amazing, on the spice route, on the incense route, it was a major trading hub, and that ancient site is now just being resurrected by archaeological work. The famous things that were carved in stone, and they were basically tombs that we're all familiar with. That's all still there, but inside there was so much magnificent structures, and a lot of work has been done there, and it's an amazing place. And then up north in Jerash, one of the cities of the Decapolis, it's an incredible Roman city that just spread out, and they're continuing to excavate. And there's just so much wonderful. An ancient Roman site, it's magnificent. And it was a major city, one of those cities of the Decapolis that the New Testament talks about. And then there's work going on all over the place. The monastery of Lot. There's a monastery built right in the side of the mountain, and the inscriptions, the Byzantine monastery, about 600 A.D., and inscriptions in mosaic tile on the floor, which was typical, mentions Lot. 2 of the inscriptions, you got Lot's name, so we think it was a monastery built. It's a 3 apse monastery, and the left apse, it's the entrance to a cave. And the Bible says that Lot and his 2 daughters stayed in a cave. And so we think, now we don't know that was the cave that Lot was in, but we can tell you that the Byzantines thought that was the cave. And so there's just some amazing things to be seen in Jordan.
Gary, you mentioned the dig that you work at el-Hammam.
Yes.
But only briefly. Maybe we can circle back around to that, and you could tell us about the site a little bit, and some of the significance of it, because it's a massive site, and there's the stuff you've found there is just, it's unbelievable, the beautiful stuff that's been preserved. So why don't you go ahead and share about that a little bit.
It's a massive site with a wall around, what we're pretty sure around 60 acres, with a wall that's 17 feet wide, probably would have stood about 50 feet high. And this massive wall made of mud bricks on stone foundation, sun-dried mud bricks, and we were actually walking on the tops of this wall, these sun-dried mud bricks that had disintegrated. We were walking back and forth. Nobody knew. Our archaeological team didn't know it. The Jordanian archaeological teams working with us didn't know it. And when we excavated there, and it was my privilege to excavate that, we realized we were walking on top of, and we dug down through about 8 courses of mud bricks. Then we got down to the stone foundation beneath that, standing about 5 feet high. And so there's this wall standing 12 feet high that nobody knew existed. And the wall goes back well before 2000 BC.
Oh, is that ancient?
It was that old, and it was really amazing. I'm leaving just shortly to go back, and we're excavating a royal palace from about 1700 BC, and it's just incredible. We're the kitchen, and all this incredible pottery and stuff that we're finding and artifacts. It's really, it's a wonderful place. And we think that in Moses' day, that was the site of Abel Shittim, where the last place the Israelites camped before they crossed over. It was empty at the time the Israelites came through.
Yeah.
But when all this other stuff was buried, and they stayed there for a little while and then crossed over.
What you're describing, the fortifications and stuff, sounds Canaanite, but you're not saying it's Canaanite. Do we know who built the city? Amorites? Or do we have any idea from
we would assume,
literature?
It's because it's in the valley, we would say it was Canaanite.
It was, okay.
We would say it was Canaanite. The culture seems to fit the Canaanite east side of the Jordan River. See, the Jordan River wasn't the major boundary. It was going up the mountain that was the major boundary.
Okay.
So the Canaanite society seemed to come over to that side, and it was up high on going straight up that mountain, which is just really brutal. And that was a whole new culture on top.
Yeah, so that was the
Jordan
dividing
Plateau.
line. So this massive fortification is consistent with what we see in
Canaan.
Over in Canaan proper, on the other side of the Jordan River. Similar type, large stones, bigger is better. The Canaanites built everything big, right?
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
And we're right across from Jericho. So much of what we know about Jericho, we see at Ammon.
There's a commonality there. That's fantastic. I wasn't aware of that. That's really good to know, because we see that description in Scripture when they go into the land. They come back, the spies say, the cities are great and walled up to heaven. We've talked about this many, many, many times, but it's worth emphasizing. This is exactly what the architecture looks like from that time period.
And if I can just say,
sure,
the site, el-Hammam, has a lower city and upper city, and when you stand down beneath it all and you look up, you realize the Israelites would have been looking up at those kind of cities, and there's 200 feet straight up of rampart and wall, and they look at that and you go, the cities are walled up to the heavens.
Yeah.
How could we ever do it? Well, we can't, but God can.
But God can, that's right. That's right.
Well, let's talk a little bit now about Jordan and the New Testament, and let's just get into some of those details. Gary, what are some New Testament accounts that are all about the country of Jordan, the Jordan region?
The Gospel of John, chapter 1, says that John was baptizing in Bethany beyond the Jordan, which is east of the Jordan, and that's where he baptized Jesus. John 1 and John 10 both put the baptism of Jesus on the Jordanian side of the Jordan River. So, major event, and John makes it clear it happened in Jordan. King Herod Agrippa and then King Herod Antipas were both ruling a region called Perea. They ruled in Galilee, but also Perea, and Perea's capital was really close to where I dig, right there. In fact, my son might even have been part of it in Roman times. So it was there, and then it was at a fortress that Herod the Great built, that Herod Antipas beheaded John the Baptist. And the Bible doesn't say where it was, but Josephus says it was at Machaerus on the Jordanian side, part of the Perean kingdom of the king. So it's a place that was full of New Testament stuff. Jesus, after in the Lazarus story, Jesus left Jerusalem and he went across the Jordan, and we got some Roman buildings at my dig site, and every now and then I'll just go and stand by them, and I'll just say, Jesus was close.
Yes.
I wonder if he saw the scene I'm looking at right now. I wonder if he saw that. It's just an amazing thought. So he spent some time over there, and of course John the Baptist was over there, and that's where John lost his head, and it was a very famous place. And then last thought is Luke talks about people fleeing Jerusalem when the destruction will come. And the early Christians in 70 AD fled from Jerusalem across the Jordan to the city of Pella. And it became a major Christian center in the Byzantine and post-New Testament time period. So Jordan is very much the other part of the Holy Land.
Yeah, it is indeed. Well, Gary, this is it's fascinating. I think for our viewers, they're going to be able to connect a lot of dots here. And we need to expand our views of the Holy Land, right? And our understanding of biblical history as it was lived out in those areas. Well, I know there's some discussion about where Jesus was baptized, and there's some different opinions about that, but that's all good stuff for our viewers. They can dig in and look at Jordan and look at the biblical events that happened there and do a little bit of reading and study on their own. Gary, it's been great having you, and this discussion is so very important on the wonderful land of Jordan.
Yeah, thanks for being with us, Gary. It's always great to have you here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us today as we've been sharing in the important archaeological discoveries and the biblical accounts concerning the great land of Jordan. I want to thank Henry Smith, my co-host, and archaeologist Gary Byers. Thank them for joining me in this important conversation that we've had today. And thank you for watching.